Footsteps echoed against the unfinished marble, a sharp, rhythmic sound that died in the vastness of the corridor. Solomon walked the length of the hall, his hand trailing along the wall. The stone was cold, polished to a mirror finish, yet his fingers traced the veins of the marble as if searching for a flaw. He stopped. Above, the ceiling was a scaffold of timber and rope. Men moved in the rafters, pressing gold leaf into the plaster with steady, practiced motions. Solomon tracked their movements, but his eyes were vacant, calculating the cost of the next expansion rather than admiring the craft. He stepped away from the wall and moved toward the center of the hall, where a massive pillar rose toward the gloom. He pressed his palm flat against the cold surface, leaning his weight into the stone. The marble did not yield. It remained static, indifferent to his touch. He stared into the grain of the rock, his jaw tightening. He pulled his hand away, leaving a faint smudge of oil on the pristine surface, and turned back toward the shadows of the unfinished wing. He left the corridor and climbed the wide, sweeping staircase. Each step was a deliberate strike against the stone. At the summit stood the throne of lions. The golden beasts stared into the hall, their jaws frozen in a permanent, silent roar. Solomon approached the seat, his movements measured, almost mechanical. He lowered himself onto the platform. The structure groaned under the shift in weight. High above, the sun broke through the clerestory windows, striking the crown on his head. The light fractured, casting jagged, shifting shadows across his face that seemed to move independently of his features. He looked out over the expanse of his kingdom. The city sprawled below, a grid of white stone and bustling activity, but his focus did not settle on the streets. His eyes tracked past the city walls, past the distant hills, and toward the jagged line where the earth met the sky. He leaned forward, bracing his elbows. The lions beneath his hands were cold, unyielding metal. He remained motionless, a figure anchored in gold, yet his gaze suggested he was already miles away. Solomon stood, the movement sudden and sharp. He descended the dais, his boots clicking against the floor until he reached the heavy table in the center of the hall. 3 men waited there, their heads bowed. They unrolled a massive sheet of parchment, the edges curling against the dark wood. It was a map of the known world, inked in fading lines and charcoal. Solomon did not look at the men. He leaned over the table, his fingers splayed across the surface, pinning the paper flat. He traced the jagged coastline of the northern provinces, then moved his hand inland, cutting a straight line through the mountains. The architects shifted, murmuring about the terrain, but Solomon ignored them. He picked up a stylus, the tip biting into the fiber of the parchment. He drew a new route, a bold, dark stroke. He pressed harder, the sound of the metal scratching against the table audible in the quiet room. He tapped the new line twice, a command that left no room for debate. The architects exchanged glances, their hands trembling as they reached for their compasses. Solomon straightened, his eyes fixed on the ink. The world was too small, the borders too rigid. He would redraw them, one trade route at a time, until the map reflected the reach of his own will. The air changed as he stepped onto the platform. It was thick, heavy with the grit of pulverized limestone and the scent of salt-drenched skin. Below, the site was a churning sea of movement. Thousands of laborers moved in rhythm, their muscles corded and slick, hauling massive blocks of stone. The sound was constant, the grinding of rock against rock, the rhythmic thud of heavy timber, and the strained breathing of men pushed to their limits. Solomon stood at the edge of the raised dais. He did not blink. He watched the dust swirl in the heat shimmer, coating the ground and the people alike. A group of men struggled to maneuver a slab into place, their feet sliding in the loose earth, their efforts frantic. Solomon looked down at them, his expression unmoving. He was a statue overlooking a hive. He did not acknowledge the heat that made the horizon ripple or the exhaustion that pulled at the backs of the workers. He simply tracked the progress of the wall, measuring the height of the stone against the sky. The work was relentless, a sprawling display of human force, yet he viewed it as one might view the movement of clouds, a process to be directed, observed, and ultimately consumed by his own ambition. He left the noise of the site behind, retreating into the cool, windowless silence of the treasury. The door groaned on its hinges, sealing the world away. Here, the air was stagnant, smelling of metal and old dust. Solomon walked to the center of the room where the wealth of a dozen provinces lay heaped in a jagged mountain. He reached out, his fingers sinking into the cold, hard surface of the coins. He plunged his hands deep, pushing through the layers until his wrists were buried in the gold. He lifted a handful, letting the pieces spill back down. The rhythmic, metallic clatter echoed against the stone walls, a sharp, hollow sound that filled the room but offered no warmth. He did it again, slower this time, watching the light catch the edges of the metal. His brow furrowed. He pressed his palms against the pile, trying to feel the weight of his power. But the gold remained inert, indifferent to his touch. The clatter died away, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the coins themselves. He stared at the mountain, his expression tight. The abundance was absolute, yet the void inside him remained untouched, unfillable, and vast. He stood there for a long time, waiting for a satisfaction that refused to arrive. Night claimed the palace, but the banquet hall defied it with a sea of flickering light. Hundreds of candles burned in silver sconces, casting long, dancing shadows against the tapestries. The table stretched out, a landscape of excess laden with roasted game, exotic fruits, and heavy, ornate platters. Solomon took his place at the head. He did not reach for the food. He did not signal the servants. He sat with his back straight, his posture rigid as stone, creating a perimeter of silence that no laughter or music could breach. He lifted a silver chalice, the metal cool against his fingers. He stared into the dark wine. The liquid was still, a perfect obsidian mirror capturing the frantic pulse of the flames nearby. He watched the firelight jump and die within the reflection, a cycle of light that never reached his eyes. Around him, the hall was alive, but he remained a ghost at his own feast. He tilted the cup, watching the wine swirl, yet he did not drink. The banquet hall noise faded into a dull hum. The camera moved closer, past the silver chalice and the untouched wine, until the world narrowed to the surface of Solomon's eye. Within that dark iris, a single candle flame danced, trapped in the reflection. It flickered, grew tall, then shuddered. The wick curled, the light sputtered, and the flame collapsed into a thin wisp of gray smoke. The reflection vanished, replaced by the cold, empty darkness of the hall. In that sudden absence of light, the scene shifted. The grandeur of the palace dissolved into the silence of a stone-walled library. Kunta sat at a heavy desk, his face illuminated by the final, dying embers of a desk lamp. Before him lay a massive, leather-bound volume, its pages dense with ink and history. He placed his hand on the cover, the weight of the book pressing into the wood with a final, resonant thud. The sound echoed through the room, marking the end of a long, exhausting chapter. Kunta reached out, his fingers steady, and snuffed the last candle. The room plunged into absolute shadow. Kunta looked directly toward the lens, his expression unyielding, as if he were waiting for the final tally of a life built on stone and gold. In the darkness, a faint, golden glow emerged. An hourglass stood on the floor, its frame polished and heavy. The sand within trickled downward, a relentless, dry sound against the glass. Grain by grain, the mound at the bottom grew, rising until it pressed against the narrow neck. The pressure mounted. A hairline fracture appeared on the surface of the glass, jagged and sharp. It spider-webbed outward, tracing lines of failure across the vessel. With a sudden, brittle snap, the glass gave way. The structure collapsed. The sand spilled out, mixing with the dust. The time of kings had run out. Only the silence remained.